The Force will be with you, always.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Star Wars Alliance podcast. I am one of your hosts, Nathan, and with me tonight is my co-host,
Katie. I'm here.
Katie. And tonight I'm gonna get all the housekeeping done, and we're gonna introduce a very special guest. So let me get all the housekeeping out of the way. First of all, we are Star Wars Alliance, as I said, and we're part of the Geek Ultimate Alliance Network, where it is your one-stop shop for everything geek, nerd, whatever you want to call it. Where Mondays you have Marvel Alliance with Travis Snail and Chris Balga. On Tuesdays you have DC Alliance with Greg and Travis Hines. Wednesday is a comic book show, World's Finest True Believers, with Chris Balga, where he and a guest take somebody's favorite arc of a comic book and they break it down. Well, why they like it, they give credit to the pencil. I mean, everything. It's a very well done show. Sorry, I just fanned out a little. Thursdays is Katie Day, where Katie and myself, on every other week, you can hear this show, Star Wars Alliance. But on the opposite week of that, Katie does Slice of Film, where Katie takes somebody and a movie that she's never seen before, and they watch it, and it's usually somebody else's favorite, and they go over and talk to it, and it's a really interesting perspective from somebody that's never seen something and somebody who loves it. And then Fridays you have superhero discussions with, again, Greg and Travis Hines, where they take an animated movie or series and go through it episode by episode or movie by movie. And right now, Superman, the animated series. We also have a Patreon account where $1 gets you, it just kind of help out, and you get, it just kind of helps us out. $5 tier, you get early you get ad-free
early episodes
and early episodes, yes. And early episodes. And I think we just launched a $10 tier where you get exclusive movie reviews or roundtables. Like the whole network just got together and we ranked our top 10 comic book movies of all time, which is a great listen, but that is exclusive to the $10 tier. But now that I've said all of that, I will stop rambling and I will kick it over to Katie so she can introduce our very special guest tonight. Katie?
I will do so. With us tonight, or whatever time of day you're listening, we have Tom, who's an editor on the Del Rey Star Wars books. Tom, how are you doing tonight?
Yes.
I'm doing great. It's really wonderful to be here, and I'm really glad that you guys invited me on the show.
Yes, thank you for being here. This is yes, this was really exciting.
Honestly, I was a bit starstruck, if I'm being very honest.
Oh gosh.
Yes, I was as well. So
that's neither here nor there.
Yes. So just to kind of lead us into everything, so I know you come from an accounting background. So what got you into editing in general in the publishing world? And then what got you onto Star Wars?
Yeah, how do you go from accountant to publisher at Del Rey? Because that has got to be a fascinating story.
It is, and it's a really, really long story, and most of the time I only promise to tell it to people if they are constantly pushing copious amounts of very sweet desserts and candies towards me. So I'll give you guys kind of like the abbreviated short version, and that is that I did in fact go to school and grad school and graduated to become an accountant and worked in accounting. And when I started doing that, a couple things were going on. First, I kind of knew like I didn't really want to be an accountant forever. I was like, I like doing this. I'm good at it. I always liked math in school. It kind of just seemed like a pretty decent career path of something I was good at. And, I was told growing up, hey, accountants, you can make good money, this and that. So that was kind of what drew me there. And I started doing it, but I knew it wasn't going to be forever. But I was like, this is a good foundation. I can go do other things, which accounting is. It's a great foundation for doing lots of other stuff. And so I started working, and this happened to actually be back around like 2008, 2009, when all the big like credit crisis, like the Big Short, like housing, crisis, big financial collapse happened, which I still had a job because I was doing accounting and taxes. And even when the economy's really bad, people are still supposed to pay their taxes. So, still had a gig, but it put a lot more pressure on the job that I was doing. Generally it took something that I already wasn't super happy about and just like dialed that up to 11. So I knew right there and then I was like, okay, this definitely isn't going to be long term. I would prefer it not even to be short term. So I looked around and I said to myself, well, what do I want to do with my life? And so what I did was I just sort of thought back to when I was in college, when I was in high school, and even after when I had just graduated, because this was less than a year after I graduated college and grad school, was like, well, what else do I like? And what else do I like doing? And what else do I think I'm good at? And everything else that I'd ever done extracurricular wise was related to writing and editing. I was the editor-in-chief of a newspaper. I did college radio. I edited lit annuals. I did all this other writing and editing stuff on the side. And I was like, well, if that's what I was doing when I wasn't studying for accounting, like, why don't I just do that? And obviously I grew up reading a ton. I grew up reading science fiction and fantasy a ton, love science fiction and fantasy, and I grew up reading Star Wars a ton. And I was like, well, somebody makes those books, like maybe I could do that. And so actually the day that I quit my accounting job, because I decided to go back to grad school to get a degree that had the word writing in it, because I figured nobody's going to look at a job applicant for an editing job, see the word accounting at the top of the resume. They're going to get 2 sentences in my resume and throw it in the garbage.
This is
like,
our guy.
You're gonna be like, did he apply to the wrong job? Like, whatever. So I decided I needed to get another degree that had writing in it. And so when I was planning to leave my accounting job to go do that after I got into grad school, my boss at the time said, like, what the heck are you going to do? Like, you're walking away from a pretty good job. Like, what are you going to go do with this writing degree? And I said, oh, I'm going to go edit Star Wars books. I actually said this to them out loud.
You Babe Ruthed it?
I Babe Ruthed it. I said this to them out loud. I said, oh, I'm going to go work on Star Wars books and make science fiction fantasy novels. So that's sort of what drew me to it, because I just was reading Star Wars, read books my entire life. And I was just like, well, somebody gets to do that. And like, I think I would be good at that. I'd like to do that. And so I just went and figured out how to do it.
That is awesome.
That's like part one of like a 90-part saga. So we'll leave it at that.
That's so cool that you literally Babe Ruthed it. You were like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go write Star Wars books and like this. And you look at this. That is awesome. Like, I applaud that, because that is the kind of an inspirational story that people need to know, is that you can do anything you put your mind to.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's really cool. So, you said you grew up reading Star Wars books. Yes. What would kind of be your one or multiple Star Wars books to get them hooked?
Yeah, if like somebody came to you and they're like, okay, I've never read a Star Wars book, and they said, you give me one book that you think would hook me. Do you have that one book that you go, oh, take this book right here?
I used to, but I don't anymore. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
So I used to do that. I used to be like, oh, well, the first one I ever read, or my favorite one growing up or whatever, and I have an answer. But over time, and a lot of this has come from working where I work, and specifically like working and going to conventions and going to events and meeting lots of people who want to get into Star Wars and want to get into Star Wars books specifically. And so when I get asked that question now, if they say, oh, could tell me which of these books should I start with, or tell me a book to start with, the first thing that I do is I actually just start talking to the person about Star Wars. And I say, well, tell me what you really like about Star Wars. I would, and it's not like that this is I'm not engaging them in a group of questions that have right answers. It's just tell me what you like about Star Wars. Because lots of people come to Star Wars for different reasons. Some people come to Star Wars and they get really attached to just like a single character or a couple of characters. Some people come and they get really attached to an era or a single era, or multiple eras, but very specific things about maybe a single era. Some people who are like, I'm very much a Clone Wars fan. I like Star Wars overall, but like Clone Wars, the part of Star Wars that I really like, something like that.
Yeah.
Or you'll get people who are coming to it and are interested in the books, not because they're like, well, I just want to read more about Boba Fett or whomever. They say, well, it may be that they are coming to Star Wars because there's an essential question about Star Wars, either from a very plot, like, hey, what happened like after Return of the Jedi, or from like a more thematic point of view that they're interested in. And so I'll ask them a couple of these questions to get a good sense of like, what are they hoping to get out of their first Star Wars book? Because in order to hook someone to ideally want to read more of them, you want to make sure that first experience is really great. But that first experience is only going to be great for someone if it's actually accomplishing the needs that they have as someone who likes storytelling. So rather than just pick a kind of one-size-fits-all book, or even what I would consider like a catch-all book, I try to tailor a recommendation based on what someone says. Not just like, well, this author is considered the best author or one of the best authors, or this book is really, really popular. is usually I'll ask them a couple of these questions, and then I'll give them probably I'll probably give them 2 recommendations based on like part of what they said. It's like, well, you talked about this, so this would be good for that. You also talked about this would be good for that. And then kind of give them 2 places maybe to start and let them ultimately make the final decision. Because again, you're more likely, I think, to find a book that you're hooked on and find a book that you're going to have a more resonant experience with if you're ultimately the one who's making that choice. And it's my job when I get asked this question to just help give them the tools to make a more informed version of that choice.
Right. So like if my taste is like I want action adventure or something, and or if I want romance or just kind of something like that, then you're going to base it kind of off of that, like what my wants are, I guess.
Exactly, because there may be like let's use like one that a lot of people will use and say is an amazing book to start with, and I totally agree. Is Claudia Gleyer's Lost Stars or Bloodline or Thrawn by Tim Zahn, the 2017 book. Now those 3 books are all wildly different. So even though those books might be super popular and a lot of people are like, these are my favorite book. Well, if I recommend the Thrawn book to someone who actually might prefer Lost Stars because of thematically the difference between those books, it doesn't matter that I'm be like, well, this is considered a really popular book. That's not going to help that reader. You know what I mean? So that's why I kind of go through this process, because the nice thing about Star Wars books is there's so many different ones, and it's not necessarily we have to all have like a one size fits all approach.
Right. What got me hooked into Star Wars books, because I started in Legends, was I was writing fan fiction and wanted to know more about, did the Jedi after Return of the Jedi have relationships? And so I picked up Children of the Jedi, taking the title at its face value for what it was. It's not what it was, but no. So it kind of the romance there, plus the ingenuity of what it was kind of talking about, kind of hooked me. But yeah, Lost Stars is definitely a romance. I know certain Thrawn fans who won't go in and read the Thrawn trilogy because they're so attached to the Legends trilogy, but they still want to read Star Wars books. So like that wouldn't be the recommendation you want to put to those. So that makes complete sense.
Fun fact, the reason why I love Thrawn as a character is because I got the 2017, did you say it was, Thrawn book, and the way that it's Mark Thompson, right, narrated that book, the way his cadence and voice and performance for Thrawn made me fall in love with it. Plus just the writing of how the strategic mind, but it was just all that put together, and I was like, I'm hooked, I'm sold, I love this character.
That's awesome. That's great to hear.
That is ask Katie. I rave about that book.
Yes.
I've listened to it 3 different times just because I like it that much.
Yeah, I hear it. Yes. So now is the time where we're gonna kind of take a quick ad break. And we're gonna jump right back into questions after this. But just as a forewarning, we don't get to pick who the ad is from or how loud the ad is. So just take a second, adjust your volume. Thank you for supporting the podcast, and we will be right back. And we are back. So, oh my gosh. So the next question kind of on our list, we're going to jump kind of back into the publishing area of things.
Yes.
Obviously, COVID-19 is kind of a big part of life right now. So how would you say that remote work has kind of changed your day-to-day?
Well, I'm pretty lucky and privileged in that the job that I do already is pretty well adapted to remote work. The job that I do didn't have a whole lot of translation to work from home. It kind of really, to be honest, be a little bit glib. The only thing that's been different is like now I can just do my work in pajamas all the time instead of just some of the time. And the reason I say that is that, so being an editor, a lot of what you do as an editor, first of all, the only thing you really need to be an editor is like a laptop. So I don't have a lot of like technology and other like resource needs that other people in publishing and certainly other people in other jobs have. So if you give me a laptop and like a place to sit, I can do about 85-90% of my job. And I've edited books like sitting on a ferry between islands in New Zealand. I've edited books like at the top of Iceland, like visiting my wife's family. Like I've edited books like literally all over the world, just because.
Color me jealous.
Just because I was like, oh, I want to say I edited a Star Wars book, like sitting out looking at this picturesque lake in New Zealand, and also just because the job that I have is flexible enough that I could do that. So in working from home, the only thing that's really changed is obviously not being around my coworkers as readily, so having to adapt to using things like Slack or using Zoom and stuff like that. But the other part of being an editor, the other part, so for like day-to-day meetings and stuff like that, we're just like in Slack channels all day and jumping onto calls. But the other thing too is like I work with a ton of authors and other people like who are spread all over the country. So even in normal circumstances, a lot of the people I work with I never see. So like the day-to-day of, say, sending an author editorial notes or talking to my friends at Lucasfilm about our next book kind of didn't change, because it's the same as it always is. I send Jen Heddle at Lucasfilm an email, or send Tim Zahn an email, or jump on a quick call with somebody. So I'm privileged in the way that I didn't have to do a whole lot of translation. In fact, a lot of the things that I had to do for my job was about helping to support other parts of the publishing process, which like production and people who ship books and stuff, which are obviously more affected by these things. So it's been all right. And, I like I like waking up every morning, and my bed to the desk is a much easier, nicer commute, and much nearer the snacks, and I get to hang out with the interns, my cats all day. So it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Best interns in the world.
Intern Lando for the win.
Yeah. Well, so your job is pretty well suited. I guess if there's a silver lining to be had out of all this, your job was pretty well suited for something like this, if we're to find a silver lining in it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is a silver lining, because too, like as an editor, particularly the parts of editing, if you imagine like what does an editor do? I think the parts of editing that people imagine, sitting around a reading, working on manuscripts, most of that work for me and for many editors that I know, even in normal circumstances, doesn't take place in the office between the 9 to 5 hours, because you have meetings, you have all these other responsibilities. So most of the actual editing work that I do for my job was taking place at home, at night, on the weekends, when I have time out of the office anyway.
In New Zealand.
On vacation. I'm bad about taking time off. That's the thing. So even when I take vacations, I still do work and whatever, just because I'm bad about it. And I also just don't like work and stuff to pile up. So I'll find places to do it even when I'm not supposed to be working. So that's why all of it kind of translated pretty easily.
That's good. So you said managing all your projects, you don't like things to pile up. I saw in one of your previous interviews, you said you typically have about 6 projects going at once. So how do you best go about managing all of them? Because I know I have a lot of projects and I have a terrible time trying to manage them.
Yeah, so six is like that. That's I ballparked it. It's obviously not all Star Wars, because I work on things other than Star Wars.
Right.
Star Wars, by far, the thing that I spend most of my time on is
lucky.
Yes, it's a stupid awesome privilege. I try to treat like every single day it's going to get taken away from me. So I try not to take it for granted. So I try to imagine every single day like it's going to be the last day I get to work on it. So the way that I keep it organized is obviously part of a larger publishing team. So I have lots of other people in lots of other departments who I'm working with who help keep me straight on things. But one of the things about being an editor is you are the fulcrum inside a publishing house for the book. So aside from the author, you, the editor, are the person who knows the book best. You know the content of the book, you know what the goal is, maybe thematically, or what message is the book trying to deliver, or what's the overall story arc, the characters, everything. So your job as an editor is really a big part of it is project management. So I have lots of, and all of this is actually adapted from like the way that I worked when I was a student. So I have kind of lots of different I've got like notepads that I keep around me that I keep for different projects. And I'm constantly updating myself on like the status of each project. Cause you're correct. When I mentioned in previous interviews, I have about 5 to 6 projects at a time. Those projects aren't all in the same place at the same time. So some of them might be in the outline phase, other ones where I'm waiting for the manuscript to come in, other ones the manuscript's in and I've already sent notes and now I'm looking at revisions, other ones the book's on sale in 2 weeks and we're just making sure everything's wrapped up. So I keep a lot of separate notes for everything. I keep a lot of timelines and schedules so that I know in my head, okay, you know, this book has got to start getting into production by this date. So that my production team can hit all their deadlines. I need to make sure that I get authors feedback by this date so they can hit their deadlines for revision. So it's a lot of just like the kind of project management stuff you might have done in school at a different point. But
so you're the principal, and when they get that email, they go, dang it. All right. I got to meet with them. All right, I got to go.
Sometimes, but to be honest, as the editor, sometimes I will get that email from someone else and they're like, hey, where's this thing? And I'll be like, I don't have it.
The superintendent's coming for you.
Yeah. So, you know, the key part to keeping it all organized is like I'm constantly having meetings and in communication with like every other part of the publishing process, because it's constantly like, hey, by the way, like this person over here is delayed slightly, so we're going to make an adjustment over here to keep things on track. And the big thing about it's true in publishing, it's pretty much true universally, is like the only way to solve a problem is to know that there is a problem. So the big key with keeping it organized is to constantly be communicating with my authors, with my other publishing partners, my other colleagues, so that if something comes up, if an author's like, hey, I can't hit this deadline, or I've run into this problem, or there's some snag with production or something related to, you know, we're trying to put together like a cool poster for marketing. If there happen to be snags or issues, the only way that you can kind of pivot or work around those things is to obviously know that they're happening. So it's mostly a lot of time in meetings and firing off emails and trying to just keep all the trains running as close to on time as possible.
I gotcha.
Nice.
So to kind of pivot into your Star Wars area. So what? Oh gosh. I guess we'll start with the research part of everything first. So in regards to the current canon Thrawn trilogy, and obviously there's a new Thrawn trilogy coming with the Ascendancy books, you have about 5 books of Legends material and the comics galore for Thrawn. What was it like balancing that something old with the new desires for canon, Star Wars, and then like what kind of were your big references? I mean, I know you have the author, but was there anything else?
Yeah, so for that, I mean, obviously, you go back and look at previous work involving Thrawn, if for nothing else, because you want to make sure that you have consistency of character. So even if Thrawn in, you know, the 2017 book and the 2 sequels is not in the exact same part of the timeline as, say, the Heir to the Empire trilogy or his other appearances in Legends books, you obviously want, it's still the same character, and you want consistency of character. So you want consistency in the way he talks, the way he responds to things, the way that he acts. And of course, having the same person write him, having Tim Zahn writing him, makes that a lot easier. So there's a little bit of reference there. And the other part was because that particular trilogy is set during a time in the timeline and a set of circumstances that Thrawn, in pretty much none of the other storytelling prior to this, even in Legends, had ever been in, there was a little bit less to reference, because it wasn't like, okay, you know, we're actually going to be reframing part of Thrawn's history or retelling part of his history and recontextualizing it. So let's go see what was done before to think about what makes the most sense for this story. So there wasn't a whole lot that we needed to do. It was about refreshing ourselves with the character, because honestly, you know, I've read all of those books a couple of times, but it obviously had been a little while since I had read them. So I wanted to refresh them again to get in my head. And also so that obviously when you're giving feedback to the author, you're not being like, are we sure Thrawn would say that? And he's like, and you know, the author, in this case, Tim, might be like, well, he actually says this 20 times in the Heir to the Empire trilogy. Like that's not helpful if you're giving feedback. So a little bit like that. But because we're telling such a new story about it's his entrance into the Empire, which we know from base history and Legends, as well as like the Mist Encounter short story that like, okay, he was found, he's exiled, you know, and he comes into the Empire, eventually becomes a Grand Admiral. But because we're telling the more nuanced and detailed version of that story, it wasn't about having to balance anything old with new. It was just about, okay, it's the consistency of the character. Thrawn is still acting the same. He still has the same skills. He still has the same kind of feel that character did. His cadence, his talking is the same.
Yes.
And then it was just about, okay,
Which I
what's the
love.
best version now of the story that we want to tell? Knowing as well that he is eventually going to also be coming into this other story in Star Wars Rebels. So knowing that the first story that we're telling is going to help lead him into his appearance on the Rebels show. So there wasn't actually a ton to balance there. It was about just making sure we were setting the character up properly and then saying, look at this brand new place. We've never told a Thrawn story. What is the best version of that? What's the coolest threat that we can put in front of Thrawn? What are the challenges he faces in this specific moment that maybe he's never faced before, which is a fun thing to do with the character, to put him up against a challenge that he necessarily, you as a reader, even if you've been reading Thrawn for almost 30 years, because he's 30 years old next year. You know, even if you've been reading along with Thrawn for 30 years, we get to put him in a situation that you've never seen him face, which makes the character feel fresh and new to you, even if that character is, you know, is also an old friend.
Yes. Well, speaking of balance, the third book fits right in that 1 week span in Rebels where he's gone. How is it balancing that? I mean, more on Zahn, or, you know, Timothy Zahn, I'm sure, because he's the one that came up with the story. But I mean, how is it balancing to where that book fits perfectly, right? And, you know, and it references events from Rebels, and it you know what I mean? And it fits right in that little time slot perfectly, to where if you're watching, you know, Rebels through and you want to know where Thrawn's gone for that, you know, week or two, you literally could pick up Thrawn Treason and like, this is what happened. You know what I mean? This is where he was before we came back. Like, how was it balancing that?
Yeah, I mean, the fun part about that is you get really good at balancing and finding those great moments that where the broader Star Wars saga has left space, or perhaps left a question that you can answer in a keen and interesting way. So, you know, you're looking at those episodes of Rebels in the last season, and Thrawn, he disappears for a couple episodes, and the show gives a good reason why he's not there, or it scaffolds it, but you're like, he's not there. That's interesting. I wonder what he's really up to. And so that's one of those things that, because we work so closely, and we've always been working really closely with our friends at Lucasfilm, that when we identify, hey, we want to do this kind of story, and we're all like, yeah, this is the right kind of story we want to tell, making sure we're finding that best place for it. And so this particular story, because we knew that it was going to involve, you know, again, going back to that idea of who or what can we put Thrawn up against that offers a different type of challenge than we've seen before. And when you look at director Krennic, you're like, that's a perfect person to put Thrawn up against. First of all, he's kind of everything Thrawn hates.
Yes.
If you think about the kinds of things that Thrawn as a character respects, embodies, and values. He's kind of everything that Thrawn doesn't like. The things that Krennic excels at, the kind of Machiavellian, political underhandedness, subterfuge that he excels at, is the exact thing that Thrawn does not excel at. So again, you play around with a character who actually has strengths that threaten Thrawn's own, I'm not going to say weaknesses, but the own things that he does not excel at.
His blind spot, we'll say.
Exactly. So that once we knew that, it was like, okay, there's definitely then going to be this push-pull between the Defender and the Death Star project, which we kind of get some inkling in Rebels that's going on. And so once you do that, it all actually sort of just kind of falls into place naturally, like, oh, this is the perfect spot for it. And the wonderful thing about that you brought up, Nathan, is like, because it's the relatively short time period, you intrinsically get to add a little extra tension to the story, because you've added a ticking clock. You know, Thrawn's got to leave Rebels and he can have this adventure, but you know that the adventure must end. He's got to be back before before he's got to show up in Rebels again. So you add a natural tension to a story already by instituting a ticking clock. And you know this character does not have infinite time to solve a particular problem. So that was kind of how it worked there with Treason. And I guess just to kind of round it out, touch on all three, the balance there in alliances was kind of the same thing of like, who can we put Thrawn next to? Who can we tell a story with Thrawn with that we have never seen before? And, well, one of the things about Thrawn being the villain in post-Return of the Jedi Legend Space is he didn't really get to hang out with Darth Vader. Well, how can you not have him hang out with Darth Vader, especially after Tim? And I will never forget the moment I read it for the first time when he delivered that first Thrawn manuscript. and you get to the end of chapter 2 and Thrawn name drops Anakin Skywalker.
Yes.
And you're like, we're going to see this story, right? Like, we're doing this, right? Like, immediately, the moment you read that sentence, like, you don't even need to read the rest of the book.
Absolutely.
Obviously. But you're like, I want that story. So that Alliances was very much about, like, okay, we need to capitalize on that sentence, but also we need Darth Vader and Thrawn in the same room, because that's just like, that's so much fun. And it's something we never got. It's about a new story, but it's old. It's familiar at the same time.
Even him with Anakin and Padme in the Clone Wars era, that is like, because personally, like Anakin, and I consider Anakin and Vader one character, is my favorite character in the Star Wars. So like, and I got both of them. It's awesome because I get, you get Jedi Anakin, and then you get Vader, who is just on the verge of just cutting Thrawn in half the entire book. Or the entire, you know what I mean? And it's a great like you said, that tension and the way they plays off and the way Thrawn dances around Vader, and it's all 3 books are great in their own, you know what I mean, in their own rights. They all offer something different. Like you said, puts Thrawn in a different position, and where it's like I never expected in Treason for the Chiss to show up and like Vanto to come back. Vanto's a great character, and so, you know what I mean. There's, like you said, it's just, I don't want to get too fanboy into it, but yeah, like you said, it makes it interesting when in each book he's put up against a new awkward situation for him, and he always plays that 3-dimensional chess while everybody else is playing 1-dimensional and gets his way out of it.
Well, that's the challenge with a legacy character like Thrawn, and if you think about it, it's the same challenge that I imagine people who are doing like superhero stories in comics and stuff are always facing, and it's the same kind of challenge you would have faced with a character like Sherlock Holmes, which is you have these characters who have such strong identities. They have very strong sort of visions in terms of what their strengths are, their sort of particular skills and everything. And so one of the ways that you keep them fresh by keeping to tell stories with them is you have to constantly find basically things and types of stories they've never existed in before. So you have to kind of find threats they've never faced that are different than everything. You have to put them in just tonally stories that have a different tone or different feel to them than previous, because otherwise, if you don't do that, over time, suddenly, the 6th Batman story suddenly feels like the 7th and the 8th. They all feel the same. But the way that you keep a character like that or a character like Thrawn fresh, even while also telling people that have invested the time and energy to learn and spend time with that character over the years or decades, is to find those kind of new wrinkles. What kind of character haven't we put him up against? What kind of situation hasn't he found himself in? Yeah.
Your Batman reference is perfect, because Batman changes, but he's still the same in different stories and different arcs. And even when he's lighthearted or dark-hearted, like, he's still the same character. That's a great reference point. He's always the same, but he's just in new situations.
That's a great point. Just kind of, especially that placement of the canon Thrawn trilogy, like you said, where Thrawn really hasn't been before. Alliances is definitely my favorite. Just getting to see Zahn, who's one of my favorite authors from Legends, like write Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. I was like, oh yes, oh, this is so perfect. Yes. And I always have to mention it. Zahn introduced my favorite character in the Legends, Mara Jade. So I just always have to throw that out there. So I might be biased. I don't know.
But I don't think you're alone. I don't think you're alone in that, in having that level of affection for that character.
Yeah.
Katie's waiting for the day she comes into canon. She's waiting for the day.
I am waiting. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I did get Ahsoka as my strong female character. So
Ahsoka's the best.
Yes. But back to Thrawn. I'm really excited for Ascendancy and kind of to get to see that background of the chess. I was looking at the publishing panel that happened at the point this episode drops. It would be 2 weeks ago, but the publishing panel where Zahn talked about building up the Chiss empire, and kind of like you said, putting him in a situation where you don't really get to see him. So that is coming out September 4th. I believe so.
And September I cannot
1st.
wait.
September 1st.
Yeah, you 3 fewer days to wait.
Yes, I'm so excited. Like, I am pumped.
So just about a month after this episode will drop. So that's exciting. But I am really jealous that you get to talk to Zahn all the time. I will say that.
It's good. Tim is a fun author. I've been very lucky in that pretty much all the authors I've ever worked with across all the projects I've worked on have been a lot of fun, really entertaining, and just really good storytelling partners. And Tim is obviously no exception, which is funny since Tim has basically been writing best-selling books since like before I was born. So it feels a little odd sometimes to be like talking to Tim about, storytelling and stuff, being like, dude, you've probably forgotten more about storytelling than I'll ever know about it. But it's fun. And we have actually this very conversation a lot about talking about every time we're approaching a new Thrawn story, even within developing one, talking about, okay, what are we doing with the character that's new or different, and not just new or different to be new or different, but what are we doing with the character that's new or different, or evolving the character, or taking advantage of, because we know, and Tim is obviously very well aware of the fact that there are so many readers who have 10, 20, almost 30 years experience with this character. So how do we take advantage of what readers know about Thrawn to either create some new wrinkles for the character, or bring them to a situation that maybe they think they know how it's going to play out, but it'll play out a little bit differently, and they'll get, find new ways to surprise even the people who probably know Thrawn as well as Tim does. If, there might even be some readers out there who know the character better than Tim. Maybe not, but you know what I mean? Like, it's a fun thing. Yeah, it's a fun thing to try to, the fun challenge to try to mount with each particular story. And I think going to the Ascendancy gives Tim a lot of extra toys to play with regarding Thrawn and the Chiss and his history and his connections to other people. And I'm looking forward to, I think by the time this comes out, there will at least have been one other excerpt released. So there'll be at least one. There'll be, I think, a couple more excerpts before we get to September. So even a few more chances for people to get a preview of it.
Well, me personally, I'm curious to see if Thrawn is even more like exceptional to his people, or is he, or is it just like the entire race are just like brilliant? Because I know we got a little taste of him in Tree, but I just want to know, like, is the exceptional one still even there? Or I don't know. That's just me. Just my curiosity tingling.
All I will tell you is that is actually a question that I asked Tim when we were divining and devising the start of this new trilogy. That was one of the very first questions I put to Tim, which is, how special is Thrawn among Chiss?
See, you and me on the same page.
We get an inkling of that in Treason with some of the Chiss that we meet, with Arlani and some of the regulars that we meet. But really, how special is he among Chiss? So that is a question that I think over the course of the 3 books, you will probably end up with a pretty good impression and answer about.
Awesome.
Among other
nice.
Awesome. I cannot wait. And
can't wait.
Of course, listeners, you can tune in the month of September for our book club, where we go through that book. So stay tuned.
Absolutely.
Everyone get your pronunciation skills.
Yes. Oh gosh, that is the one thing that I am. Mithran Yurodu.
Yeah, Mithran Yurodu.
Oh, and Nathan,
I love it.
Said it better than me.
Because I gotta hear them read, and I can mimic that. I gotta hear somebody else first, and then I'll mimic it.
That's true. That's true.
That's helpful.
So we are going to take a quick break, and then we will come back with our final 2 questions. Or
3.
No, 3 questions.
That's all right, Katie. We'll edit that in post.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I got that. So, okay, we'll be right back.
And we're back. Okay. Are you ready, Katie, for our final 3 questions?
I am ready. So it's some fun questions. Tom, you post a lot about like soundtracks and everything. And so obviously I'm going to give you 3 books, and if you can't answer them, then that's fine. But what would be your songs of choice for, from a certain point of view, Strikes Back, Chaos Rising, the first book of the Ascendancy trilogy, and Light of the Jedi, the first book for the High Republic?
All right, so from a certain point of view, is really hard because that's 40 stories.
Mhm.
So I think you'd have to go with like some big crazy like ensemble medley song. For some reason, the only one jumping in my head right now is "We Are the World," but that's a super old song and not really indicative of From a Certain Point of View Strikes Back. But any kind of like big, crazy, like get all the most famous musicians together to like write a really cool song. For Light of the Jedi, I have one in mind, but I'm not going to tell you until after the book comes out. I have one in mind. But for Thrawn, for Chaos Rising. So one of the reasons that I sort of post and talk about music a lot is I don't particularly have any musical skill, and I don't even know that I have any like real musical acuity. I listen to a lot of music while I'm working. So if I was in the office, I'd be listening to music a lot just because it helps kind of, drown out the din of the office. And even like when I'm editing, I actually listen to music as I'm compiling my notes, as I'm sort of working through like trying to make sure I'm being as clear to my authors with my notes as possible when I'm pointing out, things I think we have to take a look at and work on. And so over time, for every book that I work on, I will create an editorial playlist, which is informed by just like songs that come through as I'm listening to like Spotify or whatever, that just like come through on the loop or on whatever channel. And if there's a song that I think is particularly indicative or related to some part of the book, I will throw it into the playlist. And then at the end of it, I will have a playlist for that particular book. So I have a playlist for Chaos Rising. That is mostly inside jokes. So to me, it's mostly inside jokes about like something funny about a character or some thought I was having while I was reading the manuscript, or something about the plot, but it's usually not something that I think anyone would pick up until maybe after they've read the book, or maybe it's just me, or just a particular mood that I got in. Like sometimes I'll listen to some songs, and like some songs for some reason, like Panic at the Disco songs and Fall Out Boy songs, I don't know why, if they have a particular beat or tempo to them, like I find them really good to edit to. Because if I'm compiling my notes and trying to get my edit letter written and put together, for some reason, songs like that just like help me kind of like keep pace and actually get the work done.
See, I thought you were gonna say something big like Beethoven number where it's real intense, and it's just because you're doing Thrawn and he's all intense.
Yeah. So my editorial playlist for Chaos Rising, I've got to release it sometime in the next month because I think I promised people I would put it out before the book releases. The first song on the list is "For What It's Worth" by Buffalo Springfield. The second song on the list is "You're Gonna Go Far, Kid" by The Offspring. The third song on the list is "Lost Boy" by Ruth B. The fourth song on the list is "High Hopes" by Panic at the Disco. And then the fifth song, and this is the last one I'll tease, the fifth song on the list is "The Way We Were" by Barbra Streisand.
Wow, look at the range. Look at the variety.
Yeah.
So all of these songs are all in a very specific order that, again, is known only to me. And all of these songs relate to some part of the story or some character in some weird way. Or some of them are just fun songs that I wanted to listen to, or fun inside jokes. None of them are meant to be taken like super literally, like you can map out the plot of the book using these, like that you can't. But so that's what I have for Chaos Rising.
Okay.
Nice. Very nice.
Man, I'm thinking again about From a Certain Point of View Strikes Back. I almost want to pick like a Weird Al Yankovic song, because that thing is going to be, it is full of weird stories. I say that in the best way possible, because to me, Star Wars is often at its best when it gets weird. And man, there are some wild and weird stories in that thing coming up in November.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm gonna make you read it, Nathan.
Okay,
you should. I recommend it.
I might. Like I said, she told me a couple stories from the first book, the New Hope, or whichever the one was.
Yeah.
Told me a couple of them there, and I went, oh, that sounds fascinating. So I may have to go back and check that one out too, for a certain point of view.
Well, and you like audiobooks, right?
I do. I absolutely do.
I would highly recommend the audiobook for that, because for the first one, there were some special narrators. So outside of obviously the core Star Wars narrators that like obviously Mark Thompson heavily involved, and some others, in much the same way that we were able to get some special authors involved, we also got some special narrators. So, for instance, Neil Patrick Harris narrated a story for us, and yep, and nice. John Hamm narrated a story for us from Mad Men. And I don't know yet, but I assume that similar efforts will be made by our audio team for the second book. So, I encourage you maybe dip into the audio version of the first From a Certain Point of View. I think maybe you would appreciate that.
Okay. The Wills are coming back in this one. So.
Yes. Yes. Tom Engelberger at the San Diego Comic-Con panel that you referenced did confirm that he is writing another story about the Wills, which it was a pretty easy decision when we were starting up the second one. I'm like, oh, we need another Wills story, because the Wills story from the first one and the idea of someone writing the crawl is kind of very indicative of, I think, some of the idea behind the From a Certain Point of View project as a whole. And of course, Tom did such a cool job. It was like, of course, we got to ask Tom to come back and do a second one. It wouldn't make sense if we didn't try. Also, the second, the crawl for Empire Strikes Back has some interesting words in it that we get to play around with, including one word that is not really found in Star Wars, but is generally found in a different space adventure.
Oh, no.
So we get to have a little fun with that. But I don't think in 1980 anybody was thinking about that too much when that crawl was written.
No. I don't think they no, not at all.
I'm gonna have to go look at the crawl now, because I want to know what word you're referencing. So
it'll jump out to you when you go looking. It'll jump out to you.
Okay.
But he is I will tell you one other very tiny secret clue about the second From a Certain Point of View, which is Tom Engelberger is the only author who is reprising the same quote unquote character from the previous book. So we obviously have a few authors who did also contribute to the first anthology. Gary Whitta, Delilah Dawson, Adam Christopher, etc. Tom Engelberger is the only person who is doing the same character.
Okay.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and everything goes to a really good cause, getting kids to read more. So
absolutely.
Yeah, supporting first book is always great.
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely loved the first one. Ray Carson's the Red R2 unit story always makes me cry. So highly recommend you go see it. Go read it, or go listen to it. So
this R2 unit's got a bad motivator.
Always makes fun of me for that.
No, I'm making fun of Luke the way Luke says it.
So going to the next question on the list, Project Luminous was obviously a highly kept secret, but also a fun code name for the High Republic. Are there any new ones in the works? And do we get to know what, from a certain point of view, Strike's Back code name was?
Sure, I will. So there are always new code words in the works, and so the reason for this is obviously a lot of times we're working on projects for a really long time, and they're not ready to be announced, and we would prefer that nobody announce them before we're ready to announce them. So one of the things that we do is we will, and I am quite fond of this because I like coming up with them, create code words so that we can talk about them in various settings. We can create documentation. We can send documentation out and about and talk to various people about the books without, having giant, secret stuff that we're not ready to talk about yet, or they may still be kind of in development without worrying about that. So we code word basically all of our books, which is fun. It's a little aggravating because eventually a lot of people are like, what the heck is this the code word for? And then I have to tell them what it's for, again, the editor is the fulcrum. So you're often the secret keeper of the code word. So From a Certain Point of View 2 was actually code worded Fool Me Twice because
nice.
The second one. So that was Fool Me Twice. But every single book has had, almost every single book I can think of going back to A New Dawn has had a code word, I think, with maybe one or two exceptions. The novelizations haven't had code words because we would use some code words that were often used for the films for the novelization. But every other novel has had a code word. So From a Certain Point of View 2 was Fool Me Twice. Resistance Reborn was Blinding Light. The Cantobite book was called Zero Cool, which is maybe my favorite code word. Do you know what I'm referencing?
I just think it's funny.
Okay, do you know
I'm
what
trying
I'm
to think back. Because I did read the Cantobite
It's not a Star
anthology.
Wars reference, and that's the thing.
Oh, no.
The code words very usually are not related to Star Wars because that would defeat the purpose of a code word. So
I was trying to think of something in the book, but yeah, you're right. That doesn't make any sense.
So I don't know if either of you are familiar with the film Hackers from the 90s, which if you are not, it would actually make a good film for your Slice of Film podcast.
Oh,
So,
I'm going to have to go look that up.
For anyone who doesn't know, Hackers is a movie from 1995. Angelina Jolie was in it. Johnny Lee Miller, who played Sherlock Holmes on the CBS Sherlock show with Lucy Liu as Watson. So Johnny Lee Miller and Angelina Jolie were the stars. And it's this movie that's about computer hackers in the mid 90s. And the thing that's funny about it is even then it was like this super campy kind of crazy about hackers, and you think about like what computers were like in 1995 and what hacking would have been like, particularly hacking in a movie in 1995. So it's this really kind of ridiculous, but I have such adoration for it. And the reason why Johnny Lee Miller's character in that movie, because everyone has to have a cool hacker handle, you can't just be like John Hacker. His handle is Zero Cool. That's his like username. Wow. And so that's because I knew that in The Last Jedi, Cantobite is where they go to find a slicer, the version of a hacker. I was like, cool, okay, it's got a connection to hackers. Okay, I'm going to code name this book Zero Cool, which I was really fond of and I thought was particularly smart and inventive. Nobody else in the office did because they were just like, what is Zero Cool? And then I would explain it. And then they'd be like, why is it called that? And then I would explain why. And then they'd be like, I'm really sorry I asked. I should have just not asked. Because that's But yes, code words are super fun. The Ascendancy trilogy, book one was codenamed Eiffel, as in Eiffel 65, the Euro band that made that song "I'm Blue," super popular. So Eiffel, and we have all sorts of. We always have code names. We try to make them both as esoteric as possible, but also have some weird like inside joke related to the books. I can't remember what Treason's code name was off the top of my head. Alliances was Black and Blue, which for a hot second, actually we considered for the actual title of the book.
Oh,
like we had a couple of conversations internally where we're like, wait a minute, should we call this Star Wars Black and Blue? Like, is that actually a cool name? And then we're like, no, that's not a good name. That's actually, it sounds like it might be, that's not a good name. So
it's a good name for something other than a Star Wars book.
Yeah. But I can't remember what Treason was. I'm going to have to go back and look because I'm sure Treason had a funny Krennic related one or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, please tell me it was something. Like, just let something capers.
Or maybe it was something related to Eli, since Eli was coming back. I don't recall, unfortunately.
Love Vanto.
Okay. Well, so you said hackers, and I feel like the baby of the group now because 95 was the year I was born. So, but I'm a programmer, and the slicer term is how I built the name of my website.
Nice.
So there's not really a distinctive programmer in Star Wars, but I really wanted to reference Star Wars because it's been such a big part of my life. So I went with Slicer Scribbles. So that's nice. How I got the title of my website.
Well, now you definitely have to check out Hackers.
I will. It's going on my list.
Slice of film. I think there's a review.
It will happen at some point.
You're gonna watch it and you're gonna be like, why did Tom recommend it? It's ridiculous.
Hey, I am accepting of all films in the film podcast that 95% consists of movies I haven't watched before, so we'll see how it goes. So the final question is kind of one I was personally intrigued by. Especially seeing how the Dr. Aphra audio drama came into being, I would say relatively quickly after Dooku Jedi Lost. Granted, I don't know how production works, but so how do fan reactions to new ideas? Because the audio drama for Dooku Jedi Lost was something that hadn't really been done. I don't know if ever, but maybe in quite a while. So how did the reactions there play into the further development of the Dr. Aphra or audio dramas in general for Star Wars?
Yeah, so, obviously the idea of radio dramas or serialized dramas is not like we didn't invent it with Dooku Jedi Lost. There's obviously NPR dramatizations of Star Wars from the past. There's been Marvel kind of audio dramas, all sorts of serialized storytelling going on in the audio space. But when we thought about it for Star Wars, we were like, you know what? Obviously, even like 5 years ago, like audiobooks weren't even really a thing outside of for a very niche audience, but particularly the idea of people carrying audiobooks around on like their phones as in the same way they do music. And so we were like, is there something we can do that is special for the format, that takes advantage of what that format does that, a print book doesn't? And can we do something special? Cool. And so we try it with like, can we try something out? So that was what, the idea behind Dooku was. And it was with the idea that like, if people really dig this, cool, we should do more of them, in the same way that if people dig anything, it probably behooves you to try to do more of them or figure out what they liked about it and do more of that thing. And so I think it was pretty soon after, because people seemed to really dig Dooku, we were like, yeah, we should definitely do another. And the question was sort of like, well, what comes next? And to be honest, and as they mentioned, like on the panel and stuff, and as they've talked about in interviews, like we've loved Dr. Aphra since the first moment she showed up in the Vader comics. And, particularly myself being good friends with Heather and Jordan and the team that helped Kieran and Salvatore LaRocca originate Aphra. Like from the moment they created Aphra, I was just like, Aphra is a wonderful character. I love Aphra. We need to tell stories with Aphra. And, we put a story with Aphra in the first from a certain point of view. So it was almost like a pretty natural, easy thing to be like, well, if we're doing another of these, what character or what focus should we do? And we're like, oh, Aphra would be perfect. Aphra's got such a unique point of view. She's got such a unique voice that like will just come to life in audio, in such a way. And so, the reaction to Dooku and the fact that people seemed to really dig it and seemed really excited by the idea of another way to experience Star Wars in yet another different way, because the audio dramas do something that the print books don't do, which does something that the comics doesn't do, which is different than what video games do, which is different than TV and different movies, et cetera, et cetera. And so because people seemed excited by it, then we're like, great. And we had so much fun doing it. I mean, getting to do all these Star Wars stories is fun, but getting to make that and helping to flesh out a full cast thing and do all these recordings was so much fun. So getting to do that again and work closely with our friends on the audio team was just like, oh, we get to do that again? Sure, let's totally do that. So it just made a ton of sense to then explore somebody like Aphra as the next one.
Gotcha.
That's awesome.
Yeah, what's the best way kind of for fans to communicate that? Obviously, Twitter's a big thing. Like Nathan has one, I have one, you have one. But like, is there a different way that fans can say, "Oh, I want more of this character," or "I want more audio dramas"?
This format, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple basic things. Like with anything, like if people, if you want more of a certain type of comic, will need to buy and read the comic. If you want certain type of TV show or movie or book, whatever, at some base level, like people need to buy and consume it. Now, one of the positive things about books, audiobooks play into this, and print books, is that there are a number of very low cost or free resources that people can use to consume those stories in the same way that, say, going out to a store or ordering online, like, and paying full price for, that sort of signals to the people who make these things, like me and the people I work with, that you want more of it. So, you checking a book out of the library, which is free to you, or, checking a audiobook out of, or ebook out of Overdrive or any of those, the free library connected things, is just as valuable as someone who says, okay, I have an extra $20 or $15 or whatever it happens to cost when you're buying it. So buying things in whatever form that you're capable of and stuff is obviously huge. Social media like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, engaging either directly with us through our channels or just like through hashtags and stuff is big, because we're always looking around at the conversation. And if we're seeing people talking about a particular book or talking a lot about a character, it obviously speaks to that there's interest and intrigue and joy enough for that character or that story that it's actually living beyond its core text. So seeing people create fan art, seeing people kind of engage in other transformative ways like fanfic. Obviously, I'm not really allowed, and we aren't really allowed to read fanfic, but hearing people say, hey, I'm writing fic about Dooku, or I'm writing fic influenced by Dooku Jedi Lost, like that, those types of conversations inform us, okay, great. There are people who are engaging with these books on a number of levels. They're buying and reading, or, borrowing and reading, etc. But they're also bringing them to life and making them a core part of their Star Wars experience. And that's the kind of thing that tells us, oh, great, these are the kinds of stories, these are the kinds of characters that we should be investigating more. And another really good example of it actually is Rey Sloan, the wonderful and
Yes,
great Rey Sloan, who made her debut in A New Dawn, and she's making her debut in a book that is going to introduce readers to two of the central characters of a big TV show, Rebels, in Kanan and Hera. And yet after A New Dawn came out, we got so much positive reaction from people being like, wow, this character Rey Sloan's amazing. I love, I hope we get to see more of Rey Sloan. And that certainly played a role in her showing up in other stories that she ended up showing up in. When we sort of needed an Imperial point of view, oh, hey, we need a good Imperial character or something like this. Do we create another new one? Is there someone else we can draw on? It's like, well, this character, Rey Sloan, people seem to really like, and she would also fit really well in here. Let's continue her story. So there's lots of different ways that people can do that. Obviously, one really good way that is not really viable at the moment is spend a lot of time just listening to people when we go to conventions and events. People coming up to the booth, and people think that these kind of one-off comments don't mean much. If you come up to them like, I really love that character, and like we actually tried to aggregate and pay attention to that stuff as best we can. Some of it ends up being anecdotal and everything, but
Sure.
people, sending us an ad on Twitter or saying like, hey, I really dug this character from this book, or I really dug this thing. We try to pay attention to that as best we can. And certainly when we're getting lots of it, or we're getting it consistently, it's easier to kind of notice the trends and then think about, okay, are there good ways to bring these characters into other books? I think he always planned to do it, and certainly I think it would have happened, but it's not lost on us that how much affinity and affection readers had towards Eli Vanto from Thrawn, and the fact that he wasn't in alliances. And obviously that's a little bit by design because of how Thrawn ends and the story that's taking place in alliances. But it was always in the back of our minds, and as we started working on Treason, it was pretty much a no-brainer that he was probably going to come back. But certainly what we understood when we knew he was going to come back is like, we know that this is going to resonate with a lot of readers because we've been hearing from people saying, hey, I really enjoyed this character. I would love to see more of this character, which is great.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Right.
I remember seeing the "Where is Eli Vanto" tag going on Twitter.
And that's a great example. That's not the kind of thing that the people who started it, like it's people with like millions of followers and stuff. Like that was people who are passionate about a character, or passionate about a thing, who put together this kind of effort to help amplify and let us know that like we dug and want this character and would love to see more stories with them.
What about a character like a Cal Kestis or a BD1 who originated the video game, the Jedi Fallen Order, or like his master? I can't remember the other two characters he pilots the ship with and stuff. But like, how does that translate? Like, can we people like I really like about him? Does that help if I'm talking about it? Does that help make him show up in a book?
I mean, it
like
certainly can. I mean, one of the things, obviously, we're always looking for when we're trying to consider bringing any character or telling any story, but particularly bringing a character from one medium into a book, is to think about what are we going to do with a book that perhaps the medium that character is coming from is just different. How are we going to take advantage of the differences that a book gives versus, say, in this case, let's say a video game. And also, what is a storytelling opportunity that is valuable for a book that isn't just trying to replicate what the video game did, because the video game probably did it really well. So why would you just repeat that? But yeah, we pay attention to, and I think people across, the different parts of Star Wars and publishing, that at least the people that I know do, pay attention to, like, wow, these characters are really popular in comics. Afra is a great example. These characters are real popular here. And so when we're thinking about what stories can we tell and what characters make sense for those stories, that's when these kind of ideas bubble up of like, oh, well, there's this existing character over here who might fit really well, and it seems like people would really like to see more stories with them. Maybe they would make sense for a book. So yeah, I mean, the fact that a certain characters may not be either originating in books or might not be native to books doesn't necessarily mean that someone saying, hey, I would love to see a book about this isn't necessarily going to have an impact.
What about a character like in? I mean, I wasn't a huge gamer, but I remember playing these games back a long time, like Kyle Katarn, the Jedi games.
Ah, yes,
you
I
know
love
what I mean?
him.
Like, how does that work? As far as I know, he's not in anything. Does that work? Because it like hashtag bringing back Kyle Katarn. You know what I mean? And like maybe all right, let's find a way to bring him in, or like how does that? He's a popular video game character, and now he's nowhere to be found. What really? You know what I mean?
Well, that plays into there is an extra dimension to that particular an example like that, because obviously Kyle Katarn is a Legends character.
Yes.
So to kind of get at the general idea of like how does it work in terms of translating, let's say, a Legends character into canon, one of the things that at least is important for me, and I think this, I'm not going to generalize and speak for all people ever, but I
Sure.
feel like this is probably generally true, is that one of the things that's important for me and important for us when we're talking about it, and it certainly was true of Thrawn, is, there's a version of bringing a character, let's just use Kyle Katarn as an example, to canon, where you basically just like create a character and slap Kyle Katarn's name on them just so that you can tell people you did it, and just to be like, hey, look, it's Kyle Katarn, it's that character.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're not bringing that character into a story that makes sense for that character, both sort of honors what made that character interesting and popular and made that character resonate originally, while also perhaps doing something a little new with them that's not also, completely
Add a character.
again, negating everything that character was, so that again you're just ending up with a shell with the same name. That adds that extra dimension. And so there's always that question of like, are you just gonna put the Legends character name on a different character just because you want to be able to say you use that name, or are you actually trying to tell a resonant good story and bringing that character in a way that is honoring that character's legacy, but also providing room for that character to kind of grow into not a different version of itself, but much like Thrawn, kind of like an additive version of itself. So that's kind of always the extra thing. And I at least personally, I'm sort of firmly in the camp of like, if it's really just like we're slapping someone's name on there, or we're just going to throw a name or a reference in there because we want to be able to say we did, I'd rather not do it personally. I'd rather, make a new original character or pivot in a way that doesn't require a thing like that. Because that just to me is not, I don't think that's what someone's asking for. If they're saying, hey, I want Kyle Katarn in this story, I don't think they're just asking for me to name drop Kyle Katarn in the story.
You just made Katie's day, because that's what her biggest fear with Mara Jade was, is they just use the name. She goes, damn it.
Yeah, that's what I was literally about to say. I was like, that's my biggest fear is, and I know Mara Jade might not be the most popular character with like George Lucas or someone else, but like I've heard that. I've never actually seen where he said he hated her, because I can't bring myself to come to terms with that. But I'm just like, I want Mara. She doesn't have to be Mara Jade Skywalker. She can just be Mara Jade and still stay pretty true to the essence of the original character. So.
Oh.
Excuse me.
You okay?
It's all right.
Yeah,
It's all right.
Water went down the wrong pipe.
We've all been there.
And that's really all the questions we really have for you,
Yeah.
Tom, unless Nathan has anything else.
No. I'm just very grateful that you came on and answered the questions we have and let us just kind of go down the rabbit hole with you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, this is fun. I don't get a ton of chances to just kind of chat about making books and stuff like that. So it's always fun to do. And this was great. I'm surprised it went really quickly. I was like, wow, didn't we just start 2 minutes ago?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is a really great honor, and yeah, this actually really went by fast. When I was making the notes for the second ad, I was like, wow, we're already at 40 minutes here. Wow.
You definitely gave me a peek behind the curtain. That is, I find like I always do like to see how the butter's made, or they say, you know what I mean. I like to see how it's made. I always like that behind the scenes.
So, Tom, do you mind telling us where they can find you on social media, if there's anything else that you'd like to plug?
Plug all your stuff, please.
Well, but by the time you hear this, it'll be early August. So obviously,
Yes.
Thrawn is coming up at the beginning of September. We got, from a certain point of view, Strikes Back coming up. Obviously, High Republic's on the way. There's all sorts of stuff I wish I could tell you about that I can't. That we'll find out about at some point in the future.
You can tell us off the air. No, I'm just kidding.
There's always cool. The good thing and the fun thing, one of the many fun things about my job is there's always cool projects down the road. There's always cool projects in the future that are exciting. But if folks are looking for me specifically, you can find me on Twitter at Darth Internus, INTERNOUS. Also, I help run the Del Rey Star Wars social media and stuff like that. So you can also just yell at that, and I'm often the person answering or helping to answer if you have a question or something.
Yes, please go tell Tom how cool he is on social. Very nice.
Yes, go tell him how cool he is. Nathan, where can they find you?
You can find me kicking around Twitter at WobblyBoots85, and I'm ready to talk about any and all stuff. I just like a good chit chat. Katie, How about you?
You can find me hanging around at KGilstrap13. You can find me because Nathan has still not logged into this Twitter.
I know. I'm sorry.
It's at Star Wars Alliance without the A in the wars. I will leave the Slice of Film Twitter down below, and I will leave Tom's Twitter, the Del Rey Twitter, Nathan's, all that below as per usual. And yeah, that's about it. Again, Tom, thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, thank you for being so cool.
My pleasure. Anytime. I like listening to the show, and I like what you guys do.
Very flattering. That's very flattering. Thank you.
Yes. But for now, listeners, have a good day or night, whatever time of day y'all are listening, and may the force be with you. Have a good day.
Always.